This week, we're going to be reading a book called The Case of the Gasping Garbage. And this is by Michelle Torrey, illustrated by Barbara Johansson Newman. Today, we're going to read Chapter 1 Monster Mission. Chapter 1 Monster Mission. Introducing Doyle and Fosse, science detectives, known throughout the fifth grade for their relentless pursuit of answers. And not just any answers, the right answers. On a damp, drizzly day in an attic not too far away, Drake Doyle worked alone in his homemade laboratory. The laboratory was filled with all the latest scientific equipment: a chalkboard, racks of test tubes, flasks and beakers, dozens of sharpened pencils, and a lab coat with his name on it. Drake's hair was quite wild. Some would say it stuck straight up and the color of toast. Cinnamon toast, that is. And perched on the end of his nose was a pair of round glasses, making him look very scientific indeed, which of course he was. On this damp, drizzly day, an experiment was underway, a very important experiment. The solution in the test tube fizzed and popped. Drake Doyle glanced at his watch, then scribbled the results in his lab notebook. Fizzed and popped, right on time. Not a second late. Experiment a success. Drake slapped his notebook shut. Serious scientists always slap their notebooks shut. He shoved his pencil behind his ear just as the phone rang. Doyle and Fosse, he answered, speaking in his best scientific voice. Nell Fosse was Drake's lab partner. They were in business together. Serious business. Their business card read, Doyle and Fosse, science detectives. Call us anytime. 555-7822. Hurry, hurry! It's a major emergency! Someone screamed on the other end of the phone. There's a monster in my garbage can! Drake pushed his glasses up with his finger. Obviously, this was an important phone call. Very important. And important phone calls were more important than important experiments. He set his test tubes aside. Who is this? He asked. Gabby Tolberg, she shrieked. Hurry, hurry! Oh, hi, Gabby. Gabby Telberg was in Drake's fifth grade class at school. She was a nice girl, even if she did talk too much. Now calm down and speak slowly. What seems to be the problem? Speak slowly? Are you nuts? I said there's a huge, giant, blood sucking monster in my garbage can, and it's growing bigger and bigger every second. And I'm alone in the house, and it's going to gobble me up, and I don't want to be someone's dinner. Gabby gasped for a breath. Drake was excited. This could prove to be a great day for Doyle and Fosse, science detectives. They'd never had a monster assignment before. And, of course, it would be a great day for the small town of Mossy Lake. They'd publish their findings in the local newspaper. Garbage eating monster discovered. Mossy Lake's garbage problem solved. Maybe they'd even lecture at Mossy Lake University. But Drake couldn't allow his excitement to overwhelm his good scientific sense. That was the first rule of science, and Drake was a stickler about rules of science. He cleared his throat and forced himself to speak calmly. What makes you think there's a monster? He asked. All kinds of weird gasping noises are coming from my garbage can. Something's inside. Hurry, Drake. You have to come over immediately and get rid of it. Because if you don't, I'll just have to call James Frisco. Great Scott, thought Drake, horrified. Not James Frisco. Frisco was in their fifth grade class at school. Frisco was a competitor. Frisco was a scientist. And he was a bad scientist. A very bad scientist. A mad scientist, you might say. Frisco's business card read Frisco, mad scientist. Better than Doyle and Fosse. Call me day or night, 555-6190. Why was why was Frisco such a mad scientist? Because if Frisco didn't like a number, he erased it. Because if an experiment asked for pink, Frisco used blue. Because if an experiment called for two, Frisco used one or three. But most especially because if an experiment said adult supervision required or else, Frisco did it anyway, alone. Drake knew that if Gabby hired Frisco, there would be no telling what could happen. Knowing Frisco's sloppy scientific techniques, Frisco might let the monster out of the can and he and Gabby would never be seen again. Gobbled in the blink of an eye. Drake, said Gabby. Drake, are you there? I said you have to come over immediately and get rid of it, or else I'll call Frisco. Check. I'll be right there. Click. Drake phoned Nell. She was the most fabulous partner an amateur scientist and detective genius could have. Whenever they had a serious case, Nell dropped everything and reported for duty. Doyle and Fossey, she answered, picking up the phone on his first ring. Drake here. Meet me at Gabby's house right away. Gabby's garbage can is gasping. Right. Click. Nell was already waiting on Gabby's porch by the time Drake arrived. He wasn't surprised, as she was the fastest runner in the fifth grade. With her coffee colored hair pulled back in a no nonsense ponytail, her scientific cap shoved atop her head, and her mouth set in a firm line, she looked ready to take on this most difficult case. Afternoon, Scientist Nell. Afternoon, Detective Drake. And so saying, Nell rapped sharply on the door. Inside Gabby's house, Gabby pointed to the dark corner of the garbage. There, she whispered. There's a blood-sucking monster inside that garbage can. Hurry up and get rid of it before it eats us all. Suddenly the garbage can gasped. It trembled. It burped and yerped. It belched and yelched. All in all, it was very scary indeed. Drake and Nell immediately went to work. They pulled on surgical gloves. Snap. Gabby edged toward the door. You're not going to take off the lid, are you? If there's a monster inside, Drake replied, removing the lid would be most foolish. Now, stand back. We'll take it from here. They tapped the sides of the can. Sounds hollow, whispered Nell. She scribbled in her lab notebook and tapped again. Drake sniffed the air. Smells like fresh baked bread, he observed. That reminds me. Miss Talbert, isn't your dad a baker? The best baker there is, answered Gabby. He won the blue ribbon last year at the county fair. Why? Just wondering, Drake muttered as he recorded his findings in his lab notebook. Meanwhile, Nell peered at the garbage can with her magnifying glass. She checked its temperature. She drew diagrams and charts. She was a most efficient scientist. Finally, Drake and Nell stood back and removed their surgical gloves. Snap. Well? Asked Gabby. Puzzling, said Drake. Fascinating, said Nell. Drake pushed up his glasses. Tell me, Miss Talbert, does your garbage can always sit here next to the furnace? Gabby shook her head. My dad moved it a few days ago. Why? It's very warm next to the furnace, that's all, said Drake. 87 degrees to be precise, added Nell. Curious, very curious, mumbled Drake. He jotted a note to himself in his notebook. What are you going to do now? Asked Gabby. Nell and I will take the garbage can back to the lab for further analysis. Expect our report within 24 hours. Okay, now that we read chapter 1, I want us to think about what do we know about Drake's motivation so far? So I'm going to look back into the story where we first learn about Drake. And that's going to be on page 1 and on page 2 is where we first learn about Drake. So his motivations, what is he like? So we know here that he has a laboratory filled with science equipment. and he's in his attic. But we also know that he's starting with he's doing an experiment. So, and we know that he's very serious about it. So, he's very serious about science, and we know that here in this paragraph where it says that he's very serious about science. So, serious scientists always slap their notebooks shut. And so that's telling us that he's serious about science. And that they're in a serious business together. And they have their own business card. So we know that he's very serious about it. Um, and we also know that he wants recognition for it. And he wants to be recognized for his efforts. And we know that here because it says they'd publish their findings in the local newspaper. Garbage eating monster discovered. Mossy's Lake garbage can problem solved. And maybe they even lecture at Mossy Lake University. So right there is where we know that he also wants recognition. So he's a serious scientist and he also wants recognition. So let's think about how Drake's motivations contribute to the sequence of the events in chapter 1. So we know that he is motivated um, to do serious science and wants recognition. So once Gabby calls him, he wants to quickly call Nell and get her going on Gabby's case so that he can get this case solved. And what do we know about Nell and her motivations so far? So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to erase this here. Sorry. Give me a second to erase all this. If I can make this any bigger. Okay. So, what do we know about Nell so far? So, when we're thinking about Nell, and we meet Nell when we are on page 6. And we meet Nell here when it says Drake phoned Nell. So, he phoned Nell right there. And we also know that here, whenever there's a serious case, Nell dropped everything and reported for duty. So we know that she is a good worker and she is also serious about science and she likes to take the tough cases and she likes to do science. So how do Nell's motivations contribute to the sequence of the events? Um, we know that she is really ready to take on Gabby's case because it says that Nell was already waiting on Gabby's front porch when Drake arrived. So we know that she was there. She dropped everything and she was there. She was ready to solve the case. Um, and she's also quick to start working on the case because right when he got there, it said that she rapped sharply on the door, which means that she knocked. She knocked pretty hard on the door right when they got there after they said good afternoon to each other. And so both of them really wanted to get started on this case. And so that's how we know. That's how this is moving along. This is sequencing. So first, um, Drake got a phone call. Well, Drake's doing an experiment, and they got a phone call from Gabby, and then he's excited about it. So then he calls Nell. Nell drops what she's doing and goes over to Gabby's house, meets him there, and then they both want to get started on the case. So that's how we know that their motivations are, and that's how their motivations are helping us to understand the sequence of events and what's happening and what's going to happen in the story. So thinking about that, I want you to think about what do you think is going to happen next? So now that we know what's going on so far, I'm sure you probably have some ideas of what may happen in chapter 2 after reading this story. So I want you just to kind of think, and you can have put this in your notebook, write it down. What are your guesses? What might happen next, and what would the next sequence be? And uh, where is the story going to go from here? Okay. So I'm excited to continue reading this story with you. This is really good reading so far, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen in chapter 2. All right. I'll see you guys later.